Good afternoon and welcome to the Workforce Observer podcast. We are pleased to have with us today Joel Kammeyer, a Senior Director, Contingent Workforce at Epiq, a global technology enabled services provider to the legal industry and corporations. Epiq takes on large scale, increasingly complex tasks for corporate counsel, law firms, and business professionals. Welcome, Joel. We're excited to have you.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, can you walk us through your role at Epiq and how you describe what you do?
Yeah, so I'm the Senior Director of Contingent Labor. We have a global program. Epic is in 18 different countries. We currently have our contingent labor through our VMS within the US, Canada, and India. And we increasingly are adding to our program within each of those countries.
Right. So operationally, at least, before we get to the strategy of it all, you're doing a lot of the stuff that what in this world an MSP would do.
That's correct. So we just a little history on our program. When
Yes,
I got
please.
here almost 6 years ago, we were a master vendor program and transitioned to an MSP, external MSP that helped run our program. We have
Right.
since taken that back in house to run. So we run that or have run that since 2022. And I have a program team of 9, including myself, that help run the program.
How big is the program? And I know you can't give specifics, but it's just above like the spend, if you can touch on it, and the type of skill sets.
Sure. Generally, we do fluctuate quite a bit in the program, but typically we're averaging anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 contingent workers at Epic that are doing something, whether that is staffing or whether that is more managed service outsourced workers. But 2,000 to 3,000 in terms of spend, we're right around 90 to 100 million typically in spend.
And what are these workers doing? I mean, obviously, some of it would be related to the law, but
Yeah,
what
for
types
sure.
of jobs? This is a couple of jobs because it is interesting.
Mainly in our program, we work with our class action settlement business. A lot of project based. So if for you and others to educate, we are the administrator behind class action settlement suits. So if you're
Okay.
getting a postcard or an email saying you're part of a class action um, group and you can opt in or opt out, we are usually the behind the scenes administrator for that. So if you think of mailroom. We staff mailroom, we staff call centers, we staff claims administrators and disperse all those payments. So Epic is the largest customer for USPS in the Portland area, and so that is a
Hmm.
large part of what we do. But you mentioned the legal space. We also do.
Right.
Epic provides outsourced corporate counsel for organizations where it may not make sense for them to have a full-time resource on. So we do a little bit of everything on that side and sprinkle in product development, IT as well.
So, what's the strategy behind the program, and how does this align with the mission of the company?
Yeah, I think just what I mentioned, project-based work is a lot of what Epic does. So I think it aligns very well with a contingent labor program. We're a strategic arm of that to make sure that we're delivering kind of a just-in-time approach for the company.
That's great. So, let's talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities of running an internal workforce program. I think compared to, I mean, I would say traditional outsourcing models, even the external MSP. So let's first talk with the biggest challenges and then opportunities, and then go on to the differences of one against the other.
Yeah, I think the challenges I would lay out just the ebbs and flows of the business. Whereas an external MSP can share clients, share resources across those clients, we don't have that within an internal program. So you really have to be smart about how you staff the team, even bringing in contingent labor for ourselves. The other part that I've run into is just market intelligence, market data. How are you keeping up on the trends and making sure you're delivering best in class solutions to your organization? So I would say those are the two that I've made sure that we are equipped to handle. On the opportunity side, I would say, cost savings has been a big driver for ours. Alignment with the business, making sure that we are a business partner and seen as that, whereas sometimes an external partner isn't viewed as that, and maybe through no fault of their own, but just dynamics within an organization. A lot of times, you'll trust an internal resource that's an employee versus more of an external partner.
That's fair. Um, So, I mean, looking ahead, I mean, so much has been said about the MSP. And when people talk about the MSP, it's usually referred, it's the external provider they're talking about. But I mean, so in your view, what do you see as the future of the MSP? And I'm not talking about either internal or external, just what you see as the future. And then I guess the next part would be how do internal programs like yours influence this future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotten a lot more complex in this space, so managing the complexities, and you really have to understand if you're bringing it in-house, are you ready to manage those complexities? Or where the external MSPs still have a place, I feel, are managing that complexity, staying up with trends. If you don't have that expertise internally or, that's not supported, to stay up with that from an internal
Right,
organization perspective,
right.
that's where the MSP comes in. I also think a growing trend would be MSPs selling, external MSPs selling more ad hoc services. So direct sourcing, curation, data, all of that. Sometimes as an internal program, I don't have that at my fingertips. So want to run this internally, but maybe I need some ad hoc services to support that. So that's what I see. And then just as the world of work has gotten more global in nature, managing complexities. I can't possibly know each of the countries and all the laws and everything else. So,
Sure.
we may have to outsource or maybe have to become more of a hybrid approach long term as well.
Oh, right, right. So you do think there is a big future then for the MSP because there are people who think like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if the next decade is going to see the MSP flourish. And I've had different people talk about it. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think there will likely always be a place for an MSP. I think it like everything, MSPs will have to evolve, and that includes our internally run program as well. I think it makes sense to manage a contingent labor program if it's large enough for an organization and become more strategic at that versus more reactionary.
Direct sourcing. And I know you did an RFP. So talk a little about what's your take on direct sourcing and how is and then the next thing is how is it shaping the world of contingent work? And obviously there are many different models out there, right?
Yeah.
So
I think direct sourcing probably gets a bad name from a supplier perspective because it takes away some business. I see it as just an additional staffing channel or
mm,
talent channel. From
right,
an organization perspective, why not take advantage of known talent or talent resources or sources that you haven't, or, maybe you do, but you do it manually. So I think it's just to me, direct sourcing is just another cog of, you have your staffing partners, you have direct sourcing, you have independent contractors, and how do you manage that more efficiently? And that's really what I think direct sourcing, it shouldn't just be oh, we have my neighbor coming on today and that is direct sourcing. That might be a portion of direct sourcing, but how do you really engage that population and re-engage and make sure that you're doing everything you can to sell your brand as well?
right. So how does Epic, without getting into giving away anything, manage its direct sourcing initiative? Have you outsourced it or how have you all approached it?
Yeah, so we found a technology partner, Optly, that helps us, that it actually integrates with our VMS, Beeline. And so that, there's a connection there that goes straight to Optly. We essentially have a third party curator as well that will help
Right.
us to engage that talent population. So we have taken more of a strategic approach of looking at what are the skill sets, what are the job titles that we're staffing with consistency and with volume, and we're really trying to fill those repeatable roles and build those talent communities with that. Now, can it still fill some of the harder to source positions or onesie twosies? Sure, it can, but I think, where we've seen the biggest bang for our buck is more in those high volume, repeatable resources.
Right. So you have your own sort of curated pool.
Correct. Yep. And we ended up, we did a rebrand or a refresh of our career site as well, plugged in that so you can find our contract positions within, our career site as well, which I think a lot of people have done as they've implemented direct sourcing.
And that's paying off, having
It
it
has,
in
absolutely.
right.
I think whether you're going and having your curator or your internal recruiters source and add to the talent community, or, it doesn't hurt to have those positions out on your career site either. I think, you have to use all of those sources to make sure it's running efficiently.
Right.
And to me, it's, making sure I think some of the brands out there have a little more of an advantage on direct sourcing than maybe others. Like Epic's name is probably not as widely known as an Amazon or a Google in the world, but that doesn't mean we should not still use those same talent channels.
No, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about the contingent workforce landscape. Like direct sourcing is one model. There are different kinds of talent that goes through that. What about the other models? What are you seeing?
Post pandemic, I've seen a lot of people working from everywhere. So that not just in the United States, but globally. You see a lot of freelance management systems like an Upwork or Fiverr, those types. You're seeing different solutions being stood up. So whereas it used to be the traditional model, we go to the VMS, we go to our staffing suppliers, we'll find labor through that, and
Right.
fairly simple to manage. It's gotten a lot more complex, I would say, in terms of just how do you use all of your talent sources, your direct sourcing, your FMS, your traditional suppliers. And I think it's forced someone in my shoes to get more strategic at what and how we source different positions.
So can you talk a little bit about that? When you say get more strategic, what do you do? Again, without giving away anything, what do you do which is a little bit more, I guess, different than others are doing?
I mentioned somewhat of it with the direct sourcing of really taking your repeatable positions. Maybe that's a focus of direct sourcing, but we recently had a position for a workday integration developer we needed in India,
Okay.
and they were only needed for 10 hours a week and for 4 to 6 weeks. So we actually utilized an FMS for that because it didn't really fit the mold of direct sourcing. It didn't fit the mold of our traditional suppliers, and we used an FMS to go find that talent, and it took less than a week to find that. So, I think that's just one example, but there's many out
Right.
there that I think, we have to put our thinking caps on to figure out how do we strategically source now using all of our talent channels.
In the past, one of the things that people did not want to be a temp or even be called a temporary worker, the whole thing was, oh no, I'm doing this to get a full time job. Do you see that changed just from your experience?
I think it's changed with just gig economy, whether you want to call it corporate America with big hires and big reductions. Like I think it's
Right.
gotten harder for the worker and for organizations. It's more complex now, and people aren't working at an organization for 40 years and then retiring. So I think it's that gig economy, that gig workforce has kind of forced that, and just forced companies to look at work and say, is this really a full-time need? If it's not, do we need is it a temp? Is it independent contractor, freelance? What does that look like? So I think it's been an overall benefit. Now it's definitely made the world a little more complex, or the workforce a little more complex to manage for organizations. So yeah, I
Right.
think someone in my shoes will probably, not things change rapidly, but I think more and more people that can manage or understand, have been educated about this workforce, can help
Right.
companies and consult with companies to make sure they are, you know, following labor laws and making sure they're not putting themselves at risk when managing that.
Great. In terms of, the contingent workforce manager, the role emerged, I would say, early 2000s, right? Or maybe even 2005. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know the exact year. And when you said that then, because I used to be writing a lot about the title, people would ask, "What is that?" Right? Now that obviously has changed. So let's talk about how your role at first two-parter again. Your role at Epic, how has that evolved since you started in this space, and then the buyer perspective, like what, how has that changed as well?
Yeah, I think, my role at Epic, 6 years I've been here, back to previously I was at Cerner and started their program as well. So I've been in the space about 13 years. I think, kind of what I mentioned previously, just that role of our buyer, it's not just managing suppliers anymore. It's really How do you manage all of those talent channels? How do you use the VMS with plug and play technology to create more, integrations, more efficiencies? So, yeah, I think the role of the buyer used to be, or contingent labor manager was more, how do we get cost savings? How do we get control? And I think it has emerged more to, okay, we've either realized those cost savings or we are at full cost containment, but now we really want to see better quality, better efficiency. How do we do this, more lean as we move forward, and get the
Right.
best talent? So, yeah, I think that's been the growing trend, and now you have all the different sources of, like I mentioned, direct sourcing, traditional supplier method, gig
Right.
workforce, FMSs.
Right.
So that I think is the emergence of those have made it more complex again.
It's an interesting world for sure. Reflecting on the past 2 decades, or last 30 years since you started here, what's the biggest change or surprise that caught you off guard as a buyer? I mean, it could be good, it could be bad.
Yeah, I don't know if off guard is the right word, but I think just recently I think it has the potential to be such a disruptor in a hopefully good way for this of how do we as companies directly connect with talent and make it easier for that talent to really get to work and get to do challenging and meaningful work without maybe needing a full-time position like that.
Fair. Anything that you can comment on in the AI space? Any tool or anything that you have seen which is your team is using or you are using, which is like, wow, this is definitely a game changer. And I know it automates a lot of stuff, and beyond that, is there something which kind of you guys at Epic like and use?
I mean, we're keeping our eyes on a lot. I would say we use Microsoft Copilot right now
Oh, you do. Okay.
for the purposes that we use. A lot of it is, how do you create emails more efficiently, templates, how do you do documentation for, internal documentation, external documentation. We use them
Right.
for supplier QBRs, and it takes, quite honestly, surprisingly good notes, better than my notes even manually. So, I think that's
Yeah.
where, just how do you become more efficient? I think from a, sourcing talent perspective, AI has been out there for quite a while now. It's a growing,
Right.
it's very trendy in terms of using that term, but organizations have been using AI to find talent for quite some time now. I think it's just connecting all those tools. And again, I go back to, how do you connect it in the most efficient ways to your VMS or wherever we're headed in technology to make it the most efficient?
Okay. Your views and on the contingent workforce. And what do you think? What are the prospects for growth? What do you think this, what's going to happen to this workforce?
My take would be it's still gonna continue to grow. It's continued to grow since I started in this industry 13 years ago, just progressed up. Yeah, I think there will always be a need as an organization, looks at the workforce and looks at the work that needs to get done. Organizations hopefully will become smarter at what type of labor needs to be engaged. Is that a full-time worker? Is that a temp? Is that an IC? Those are the things that I see, and as the gig workforce becomes more prevalent, I think it'll be something where organizations hopefully will just get smarter and smarter and get better at managing and better integrate those workers. Because sometimes, even though you said it's, a trend of organization, it used to be viewed as a negative to be a temp.
Yes.
I still
Yeah.
think that's a lot of times still the case of,
Right.
I'm this replaceable part, or I am this person that doesn't get as many benefits of being in the organization as a regular employee. So my hope is really that that becomes more of a trend that we see, that we can get rid of some of those risks. Some of them will always be there, but I think
Right.
how can we better integrate that population and make them feel part of the team so that, from a diversity perspective and everything else, there's a lot of readings out there that you can go study and say, more diversity will be more productivity internally. So how do we incorporate the contingent workforce as well and make sure that all companies are treating temps and ICs and whatever you have it, as part of their own?
We talk a little bit about Epic's education. Are you educating people, I mean, your internal stakeholders on the use of this workforce, so that you can kind of I guess, level the playing field? Like, hey, they may be here only for 6 months, but they may come back. Are you doing anything around that at Epic?
We've built I think it's called Articulate is what we use, and that is used anytime a new manager comes on, specifically in that organization that is pretty heavy contingent labor users. We launch a course within an employee's first week to go through from a man if they're a manager, essentially, of how do you manage this population? What are the risks? What is our VMS? What is the contingent labor program? So we do educate. Could we do more? I'm sure, but lunch and learns. We do certain items like that just to make sure our managers and our leaders are educated and understand. It's sometimes interestingly enough, we had so part of our U.S. leadership didn't even know they could use contingent labor in India as of 3 months ago. Well, we've now stood that up from a product development standpoint. So those are just things it can come up, and as you have new leaders, they're not always plugged into what's possible within an organization. So
Right.
we do
Right.
educate. Could we do a better job? Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about, or ask you a little bit about the movement, right? The movement of professionals like you between the provider and the buyer sides. What's your take on this trend? And how can it strengthen collaboration in the industry? And then I have another question, but I'll wait for you to answer this before I lead into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's a positive. It's someone coming from the supply side into the buyer side, that helps educate an organization on making sure they're paying the right rates, making sure they're doing things within the program, like engaging workers, engaging managers to get the best quality, to get the best support from suppliers. Do you have 50 suppliers you're sourcing for every position? That's not healthy. So I see that as a good thing. The supply side has educated the buyer side. On the flip side, I think it's educating the supply side on what actually goes into running a contingent labor program? What are the dynamics internally? What hoops do you have to jump through? So it's not just a as simple as, hey, I need worker, supplier go find worker. There's a lot more dynamics that go into running a contingent labor program. And so I think just educating on this is a long sales cycle, do the right things consistently, make sure you're staying up to date on trends. How do you make sure you're plugged into, what is going on within the organization, not just trying to get the sale. So I think overall it's a positive, and the more educated buyers and suppliers we have, the better the industry. And overall, I've always said this, it's a great industry, good people, always willing to help. I didn't know a thing about contingent labor when I got into the space 13 years ago, making a career change. So I educated myself on industry events, webinars, and that people have always been willing to share. So I think that's what I like best about the space.
So, how do you think that the one of the complaints that suppliers have is that they are treated poorly by buyers? And now, I don't want to get into specifics, but what do you think buyers as a whole can do so not to sort of, help suppliers not feel that way? Because I think it does impact both the way they behave, because, there are those who, I mean, you hear these stories of conferences, stalking the buyer, and the buyer feels, oh my gosh, it's too much. I don't want, I feel like I'm on display. I don't want to enter that room. But the fact is that both sides are required for a company to do its job, actually for both companies to do the job, right? So, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's, doing your homework on a company, one, don't just expect to come in and say, "Hey, Epic, I have this. Why won't you buy it?" I think it's research, do some research. Like rather than emailing 100 people a day, maybe research 10 companies and really get deep down into the weeds of what do they need? What do they hire for? Go look at their career site for what the jobs they hire. Does it match with what you provide in the market? Too many times, I think suppliers say they can do everything. So also doing an internal analysis. What do we do well as a supplier? What can I do to make sure that I am delivering what we are best at, not just saying yes to everything? So I think it's a tough market right now for suppliers, really for everybody, but I think
Right.
focusing more on doing the little things correctly, focusing on, playing that long game. I mentioned that before, but you're typically not going to just sign an MSA and go support a client by doing or by getting that in place within a week. It's going to be a long sales cycle in some cases. So, focus
Right.
on doing the right things consistently, word of mouth, referrals, go research that company. And, for me, that's what it is. I hate when I get, this 4 paragraph email from a prospective supplier and, they're trying to sell everything they have, but they never focus on what is it that I even need. So,
Right.
that would be my advice to the supply side.
And any advice for the buy side?
I think the buy side is make sure you're consistently delivering value. Stay curious. None of us know where this is going to be in 5 years with AI and with where VMSs play, MSPs play. But I think it's just, educating yourself, staying curious, understanding what is offered in the market, and don't get content. Always drive value because that's at the end of the day, that's what an organization needs from a contingent labor buy side is how do you drive value? And you do that through quality, consistency, efficiency of process, cost savings. So, I think that's and risk mitigation. So I think those are the things that you can't be content. You always have to continue to develop. And with technology rapidly developing, it can be a challenge to stay up with that. But to me, it's always staying in front or trying to stay in front and delivering that to the organization.
It just popped up. How do you keep in touch with technology advancements? You personally, what do you do? Read?
Well, I don't read. I'm bad. I don't read at all. But I think it's just quite honestly looking at webinars, trying to stay up
Mm,
with your partners. Just,
right.
I go to industry events. Most of the reason I go to industry events is for one, networking, and two, staying up on trends, staying up on what technologies. So at our industry events, a lot of times you can get hounded by suppliers, but really take time to evaluate what do they have? What is each of these the providers that are at these are they developing something cool that could help any program out? So that's how
Right.
I stay up on trends and just
Makes
talking
sense.
networking, talking within the industry. I think that has served me well.
Well, thank you so much, Joel. It's a pleasure to have you. I really appreciate your insights.
All right, thank you.